Well, I think we have a number of factors coming together. We have a general sense that in globalization, questions of identity, of belonging, of borders, of control are going away. And this is what people have an allergic reaction to. And then we have countries like the ones that, that we were talking about, Poland and Hungary, countries that have only fairly recently, in historic terms, regained their identity and their sovereignty, and for whom this attack on sovereignty is especially hard. They feel that they just regained it and now it's going away again, and this is something that they find very difficult to stomach. And then, of course, there are also the ghosts of history. These are divided societies often. These were countries under occupation or under authoritarian rule until, fairly recently. And so the old wounds, the old horror that was there, that existed in these societies, has not gone away. And so if you put all of this together and you add a little bit of arrogance from the West, a little bit of failures at the EU level, if you put that all into the mix, then you have a very complex situation that leads to what we see now. Lots of implications. First of all, of course, governance at the EU level is becoming more difficult because it's going to be a lot more difficult to find consensus or compromise at the EU level. So that's number one. The second thing is that, a number of other political leaders across Europe are now looking at these leaders in those countries and say, wow, this could be a blueprint for us. So it is inspiring to other illiberal movements that, feel that this is their moment and that, some sort of conservative backlash can be organized. And then thirdly, of course, it also means that in terms of the global game that Europe is part of, that it will be, less easy to forge, a strong, unified European position in this power game that's going on out there in the world. So, that's the story. And then there's a fourth implication, and that is perhaps the kind of silver lining in all of this. And this is that, of course, these illiberal movements put the democratic part of the political spectrum back on their heels. They now actually have to really get their act together. It's a reminder to the mainstream political forces that they have to deliver and that they have to, produce results, and so they can't be easily let off the hook again. So you also have, an element of a corrective element in that. When the mainstream parties become too complacent or too lazy or too ignorant, then at some point they will be reminded that something is at stake. And so that is perhaps the positive element in all of this. Well, I think the next 4 years will be incredibly difficult for the EU. We will see a feverish work on 1 or 2 or 3 key topics and items on refugees, perhaps on Euro governance, and maybe on security and defense, because these seem to be the big issues that now, decide as to whether Europe can stand or must fall. But what we will not see is, a shared consensus of the direction of the EU. That does not exist any longer. So we will get even more muddling through. We will get even more, pragmatic deal-making on various topics, but, a kind of shared consensus on where the whole thing should go, or even just a basic sentiment as to where this thing should go. That has gone away, which means that to a certain extent, the old politics of Europe will return. And the old politics of Europe are politics of rivalry, of counterbalancing, of group building, of suspicion, of distrust. And that will, creep into the system and make the system more difficult to handle. And the big question for me is not whether the next 4 years will be easy or difficult. I think they will be very difficult. The big question is whether after those 4 years, or maybe in 5 or 8 years, we can take, the right direction again, and kind of when the pendulum swings back and the pressure from globalization becomes so huge that perhaps, reason will prevail. I mean, that's the ultimate hope, obviously, that rationality will prevail when the pains get too big. There's no guarantee for it, but that's at least what we're hoping in terms of, the longer perspective for the EU.